Hi everyone, this is an update video on my Amazon build. This is sort of like part 2 and there are major changes in the build. In part 1 I leveled at the start of the game with a bleed based build which is predominantly physical damage, and I took that all the way to Act 2 and sort of like near the start of Act 3 I suppose, where I got my second ascendancy. After I got my second ascendancy, I made this change, and the current build here is an elemental, fully ranged, projectile based Amazon, which capitalizes on two different skills, Lightning Spear and Explosive Spear. This build is fairly simple to play, and it excels at mobility. And the main goal that I have here is to eventually get a Roa mount, which is one of the new features added in the game. The Roa mount allows you to sit on top of a Roa and allows you to have full mobility while you throw your spears. The drawback from that is that you cannot use melee attacks while on Roa, and that is the reason why I decided to go fully projectile right at the start here. So what I'll do first is explain on how this build works, and then I'll give a little bit of a showcase, and then I'll cover the passive tree and gearing options. So before going into details about the gem setup, a little bit of explanation on how this works. So this build foregoes a shield. I don't actually have a shield now because I took the keystone passive that increases attack speed by 25% if you do not have an offhand weapon. And what I did here is generate my frenzy charges, and I also do have power charges from the armor as well, but I generate frenzy charges through combat frenzy as well as sniper's mark. So first of all, about combat frenzy. Combat Frenzy will only generate a charge if you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy. Now what I'm doing is using Lightning Spear to get charges. Unfortunately, by default, most electric attacks do not actually electrocute, they only shock, and shock will not produce a charge. So this is why I use the Three Dragons mask, and this mask is mandatory for this build to work. Otherwise, you will not be able to generate charges via Combat Frenzy. With the Three Dragons mask, lightning damage will now contribute to freeze magnitude, which means that Lightning Spear can actually freeze and therefore can proc Combat Frenzy to generate charges. Secondarily, I also have Sniper's Mark, so every now and then just throw a Sniper's Mark on the target, and if you crit the target, you will be able to generate more charges. Now, to be able to consistently get charges from Sniper's Mark, you need to be able to land crits. So critical hit chance is fairly important, and with the Amazon Ascendancy, it is possible to reach about 100% critical hit chance at close range, mainly because of the second Ascendancy, which is the one here. So critical strike gives you excess base critical hit chance for any excess accuracy that you have. And if you look at my Lightning Spear, I'm actually close to 90% critical hit chance as long as I'm close range. So Lightning Spear has a base 11.2% critical hit chance now. If you look at the line at the bottom here, right here, so it has 11.2% critical hit chance. And from my excess accuracy, I get a bonus 24 to 71% critical hit chance. So assuming you are within 2 meters of the target, you get plus 71% crit hit, and you add that up to the 11%, it's sort of like 80 something percent critical hit chance. And I'm still fairly early in the passive tree. There's quite a few more critical hit chance nodes that I am gunning for now, with the goal of hitting 100% critical hit chance, which guarantees a frenzy charge with Sniper's mark. Now how do you get that high? Well, the other contributor here is the support gem. So what I have here is pinpoint critical. So pinpoint critical contributes another 60% more critical hit chance. The drawback is you sacrifice some critical damage bonus, but that's fine because lightning spear is the generator of this build, and even with the reduced critical damage bonus, you still can map fairly comfortably just by hitting lightning spear over and over again. So lightning spear will crit, will do some nice damage and clear mobs, and will also freeze mobs, and that's where the glaciation comes in, and that produces frenzy charges here. And lastly, I have just lightning infusion for damage. Secondarily, I have explosive spear. Explosive spear is the key DPS, and this is sort of like the spender projectile in the build. So when you generate charges, you can of course use frenzy charges on lightning spear to empower it, but if you accumulate enough frenzy charges, then you can also just use it on explosive spear for massive damage. And explosive spear also has potential, which uses the power charges that is produced by the armor. So my body armor produces power charges, and this gives pretty good critical hit chance to explosive spear as well. And therefore explosive spear can also more or less reliably proc sniper's mark. And this is the skill I use when I'm fighting tough elites, uniques, or main bosses. The damage is sort of like double of lightning spear, and the idea is that you try to generate charges with the sniper's mark and combat frenzy, and then you just lock explosive spear. Explosive spear also has perpetual charge, so every now and then one charge gives you multiple spears for absolutely massive damage. Now before I continue on, the other thing I want to mention also is this passive right here. So Frenetic is an extremely good passive here. While the chance is low at only 5%, the fact is that you are constantly gaining frenzy charges, so you do proc this fairly often even at 5%, and getting maximum frenzy charges is pretty good. So I'm currently at 4 maximum charges, and if you suddenly see 4 charges floating around your character, you can imagine it leads to a lot of frenzied explosive spear for massive damage. My plan is to continue on to the right and eventually also get fervor, which will bring my frenzy charges to 6, and if you happen to get 6 frenzy charges, you will absolutely melt bosses with explosive spear. Now while all that damage is tough enough, the bonus that Amazons get is also infused weapon. So anytime you consume charges, you get a bonus explosion from your projectiles, which in this case is both lightning spear and explosive spear. So infused weapon procs pretty constantly as well, because I'm constantly using both power charges as well as frenzy charges. So this is very nice damage on top, and because of this you will comfortably really melt through content. I'm now currently in Act 4 in Cruel, and I still don't really have a lot of trouble going through. Currently though, this is a bit of a glass cannon build because I forgo the shield, and I'm using 2 uniques with relatively low defense rating. So there are attacks here that will be able to one-shot you, particularly when you are fighting bosses. But because you are fairly mobile and you are attacking somewhat at a range, it's better to try to stay close because you have more critical hit chance that way. But because of your mobility and you are not at melee range, it is still pretty comfortable clearing content here. So just a brief demonstration on how it works in mapping. I'm essentially just pressing lightning spear, just one button, and I'm just running forward while spamming lightning spear. And because of the glaciation, lightning spear freezes most enemy units that it hits, and will proc combat frenzy for charges, which empowers the next lightning spear. Unfortunately, combat frenzy has been nerfed, that it only produces one charge about every 5 seconds depending on the level of combat frenzy. So another option is to every now and then just pop a sniper's mark somewhere, and then run next to the unit and just deal a crit, and that way you get some extra charges that way as well. And if you do get lucky and you hit the frenzied passive where you get instant 4 charges, you can then switch over to explosive spear for the higher damage at clearing mobs. So you see, I'm just sort of like hardly stopping. While you're throwing the spear, your move speed is lowered, and that is why the Roa mount will be pretty helpful. So once I get access to Roa mount, I can run at 100% move speed even while I'm chucking my spears.
This is what I get for freeing you.
So bosses is essentially the same. Ideally you want to put sniper's mark. Unfortunately, I'm playing on controller, and controller has auto aim, and auto aim is extremely bad. If you're playing on PC, obviously you put the sniper's mark on the boss, and here I get a frenzied charge, so I'm just lobbing explosive spear, which practically does double the damage and kills off things pretty quickly overall. So you just lob your explosive spear until you are out of charges, and then you start your lightning spear spam again. Pretty simple overall, and I'm hardly using sniper's mark on regular mobs. You don't really need to. You obviously can if you want to, but it hardly really makes a difference unless you are really struggling in damage from a low DPS weapon. Okay, so this is a demo of how a boss fight will work. So first of all, you want to lob your explosive spear and mark, and then once you land a crit, you just throw your explosive spear, and then you rinse and repeat.
Cowards! Fight or die!
Bring it on! Part of the storm!
Another option, if you're really lazy, is to just don't use lightning spear as well. Just use sniper's mark and lob explosive spear until you proc your frenzy charges,
Need more time.
and that way you
Face your death.
will also be able to fairly comfortably get your empowered explosive spear. Yeah, I'm not even using lightning spear right at the end there, just to show that because of potential, your explosive spear does have a fairly high critical hit rate as well, and if you go near enough to the enemy, you will get frenzy charges from sniper's mark, and that way we'll be able to melt down bosses as well. So now coming more in deep dive in terms of the gems and the gear. So first off, to reiterate what is actually really required. So you really need the 3 dragons mask. They currently go for fairly expensive, but if you use the active search in the trade site, you can potentially find one that's fairly cheap, because the trade site is actually swamped with these right now, and you constantly get new items being listed. So every now and then you find one below 5 exalts. I actually bought this for just 2 exalts. And then the red flare conduit, nobody really wants it. I snagged this for just 1 exalt, so it is fairly cheap if you have access to the trade site. On top of this, like I mentioned, you need to have your second ascendancy, because you need to have both the critical strike as well as elemental infusion. Now, alternative options here, if you don't have the 3 dragons mask or you can't afford it, you can slot in electrocute into lightning spear. So this allows lightning spear to electrocute and produce charges. The drawback from that is that electrocute isn't as nice as freeze, and you have to dedicate a support slot for electrocute, which means a loss of DPS somewhere. So coming from the gems, so first of all, infused weapon, I have magnified effect, ice bite, as well as primal armament. I'm not too sure about ice bite. I will get cold attacks from infused weapon because I have power charges, but from testing, the attacks from infused weapon doesn't really freeze all that much. So I might take out Ice Spike here and maybe put it on my Lightning Spear. But let's see, this really isn't I guess optimal gems, and there are probably better options here, but this is currently what I have. Disengage I hardly use nowadays. Disengage is sort of like another way to quickly save yourself other than dodge roll, and I just have Stomping Ground and Execute here. But truth be told, I hardly use Disengage nowadays. Combat Frenzy has Vitality and Precision. Now the other option is to have Profusion on Combat Frenzy so that Combat Frenzy can produce double charges. This makes mapping easier. However, I opt to put Profusion on Sniper's Mark because this allows easier generation of frenzy charges during boss fights. I think boss fights is the one that's more important. As it is now, this build has very little problem clearing maps anyway, and with the high mobility, you can just quickly move from one pack to the next while throwing lightning spears around. So that's the reason why I opt to put Profusion here. So anyway, Combat Frenzy has Vitality and Precision. Vitality is optional, you don't really need it, it just feels more comfortable that way. And I plan to replace this with Cannibalism once I get access to tier 3 support gems. Lightning Spear has Pinpoint Critical. Like I mentioned, you really need the critical hit chance to be able to proc frenzy charges on Sniper's Mark. And then Glaciation for more freeze build-up, though I am thinking of replacing this with a damage gem. And then Lightning Infusion. So Ice Bite could potentially come here depending on how well Lightning Spear can freeze. Explosive Spear has Fire Infusion, Perpetual Charge, and Potential. So Potential combos nicely with the power charges that is generated by the Red Flare Conduit body armor. And like I said, overall, the idea is you look at Lightning Spear as the generator and Explosive Spear as the spender. So that's the easy way of thinking about this. And then for Sniper's Mark, I have Profusion and Ingenuity for reduced cooldown. The other option here, if you have the extra sockets or if you don't really mind the 2-second cooldown, is to have Inspiration on Sniper's Mark. Inspiration will reduce the mana cost by 30% because Sniper's Mark is fairly expensive to cast. The other option also is to just use a rank 8 Sniper's Mark. So a rank 8, it will cost only 38 mana. The drawback is that the bonus damage that it gives is lower, but that hardly matters too much because the main goal of using Sniper's Mark is not for the damage but for the frenzy charge generation. So if you're finding yourself running out of mana too often, you can opt for a lower level Sniper's Mark to conserve on mana. Coming over to the gear, you have 3 dragons. 3 dragons is there to make lightning damage freeze, and the fire damage from Explosive Spear will shock. Red Flare Conduit is just there to generate power charges. You will never reach maximum power charges, so don't worry too much about this. So all you have to do is just spam your Explosive Spear when you have 2 or 3 power charges. And then ideally for weapon, you want to have a high physical damage, as high as possible, because all your elemental attacks are converted from physical damage, and this is an easy way to just pile damage across all your attacks. Plus, having high physical damage benefits more from the iron runes as well. That's pretty much it. The rest of the gear, you just focus on resistances. Move speed on boots is a really nice quality of life, especially on this build. So now coming to the passive tree. Starting off with the Ascendancy, you want both Elemental Infusion and Critical Strike. And then what I did here is actually start off at the bottom, so I respect my bleeding build and I came down here. We need to get both Heavy Ammunition and Careful Aim. Now I'm not too sure now whether this is actually worth it because it is quite a heavy investment in points to reach there. But the notable passives here seem pretty juicy, so I went this way and then I continue on to the right. I did a little bit of backtrack just to get both Eagle Eye and Primal Instinct, and this is because I really needed the dexterity as well, and Primal Instinct is pretty nice as a notable anyway. So what you want to do is first continue downward until you come here, and then right after that you make a beeline for Frenetic. I chose to go for Frenetic pretty early on because the 4 Frenzy charges is pretty impactful in the gameplay, especially once you hit high enough attack speeds. Now I'm still fairly low in attack speed, but it already procs fairly often, and it only continues to get better, as you can imagine, once you get to endgame and you are lobbing spears at a much higher attack rate. Once you get Frenetic, then what I do is continue downwards. I stop to get escape velocity for more mobility, and then continue downwards here. Catalysis is a very nice investment for just 2 points, and then Stand and Deliver, it really boosts your projectile as long as you are close by, and because this is an accuracy based build where you get more critical hit chance if you are near, you want to be near rather than far when you throw your projectiles, so this is the way that I go. Eventually though, you can go for something like Farsighted, and then go for a range build and go for Death from Afar instead of Stand and Deliver, and it will be much safer. You can then lob attacks from range, but this requires more investment because even with a reduction of 30% to the penalty, you still want to get more critical hit chance, and I'm not there yet, but eventually I think this is definitely an option. So continue downwards because you want to get to the spear branch. Along the way, Dance with Death, it greatly increases your attack speed. You don't really need the buckler because of your mobility. There are attacks that will one-shot you, like I say, but during the campaign it hardly matters. And near the end game, when I have an updated build, I will focus a little bit more on defensive layering. The the spear tree is pretty juicy in the notables, particularly roll and strike and precise point. And then javelin is just a very juicy critical damage bonus. And then while you are here, you can also pick up Falcon Dive as well, because you will be stacking dexterity and accuracy, so Falcon Dive gives you a lot of attack speed. In the future, I will also go for acceleration. I want to try to get more movement speed with this build to pair nicely with the Roa, but I don't have the points yet. And the other reason is, if you go for attack speed too early in the game, you will have problems with mana sustain, so this is more of a late game pick for me. Speaking of mana sustain, I then went back up here and then I'm branching to the right, and I picked up Mental Toughness. This helps tremendously with mana sustain and is very budget friendly for a 2-pointer. I am planning to go on continue to the right anyway, so these 2 points are not a waste. My plan is to continue on to the right to the end, and then I make a dip down here for the crit nodes here. And once I get enough evasion, I plan to get acrobatics as well, but that's really late game. Once I get here, then I plan to move upwards because there's some crit nodes here. And then what I want is to ultimately go all the way until I come here. Quick response, lucidity is the one that I'm aiming for. Not only does it give a nice boost to intelligence, the points leading up to it as well as the lucidity node itself gives a 16% of damage that comes from mana before life, and to me this is a very good defensive layering. You don't need mana that much anyway, and you can just drink a mana flask if you need to. This 16% is essentially a 16% damage reduction from your life pool. So this is why I'm aiming to head towards the right, and then hopefully I have enough points to reach to the top and pick this up once I get enough critical hit chance overall. So that is the plan for the build, and overall this is really just a mid-game build as it is. This will help you very easily clear maps and bosses like I've shown without too much of a difficulty. You just have to be careful of those one-shot attacks that some act bosses have, but they are fairly easy to predict and avoid anyway, especially with your high move speed and mobility. I will provide an updated build once I get more gear and more points towards the end of the game. Till then, thanks for watching.